Yeah. Then it's tops of head and the people with the biggest noses.
Okay, so we're now recording.
Oh, we are now recording.
Start as soon as you like.
He always carries a knife. He was telling me that the other day. Always carries a knife. Well, from the absolute, almost lack of background noise.
Can you just start again? Sorry, one more time.
I thought you told me we were recording.
We were, and then we weren't. Now we are again.
It's ruining my flow.
Commence.
From the delightful, almost complete lack of background noise, you will know that we are podcasting for Broadway Baby again in the luxurious surroundings of the Surgeons' Hall, which is, it's just beautiful. It's lovely, and it doesn't have that hideous, sterile feeling that most of the university buildings have. And I feel, I'm interested, but I feel I was kind of, although I volunteered, it was almost like an ambush. I got involved on Facebook with a bloke called Paul Wadey, who was, I've got to be brutally frank here, because you Aspie types don't fuck around. You were getting a bit whiny on Facebook, or very whiny on Facebook, and moany about wondering why the world isn't beating a door to anyone and everyone who is anywhere on the neurodiverse spectrum and allowing you to create your own genre of comedy, of the arts. Paul,
yes.
Why do you feel you're that special?
Because a while ago, with my skill set and my position in life and what I can do, I decided there was a job needed doing, and I was in the position to do it.
And that job was?
To champion the positive representation of autistic people. And there are many different communities on the autistic spectrum which are defined at the moment by so-called relative functionality. And we are kind of the one least represented, because other people often don't look sound like they're autistic. And I felt it was important to use what abilities I had to bring to the world a certain kind of, you might call it rock and roll, ordinary representation of being an autistic person. It isn't some savant genius, but doesn't actually fall into the category of disability, which I totally respect, and many of us define ourselves as disabled.
What is that category, before we go either?
There you go.
What is the category?
Exactly. That's what you're trying to actually make. Ordinary, common or garden, autistic people muddling through life, so many of whom don't look, sound like they're autistic, but they are. And they identify with people who don't look like them, people whose autistic natures are on top of them, so they are disabled, and then people whose autistic natures they're on top of, and they lead these amazing lives and are incredibly good at scientific things, or talent like Chris Packham. The documentary's got a very functional life. He's a stepfather at the BBC. But what about the ordinary people whose salon skill is just to get up in the mornings, keep an ordinary job down, keep a relationship going, feed their family? Or they don't have any of that, but they just get by in life. And this is why I have behaved the way I have. I was trying to promote the concept of the stealth Aspies, the people who you would never think were on the autistic spectrum. You know why? Because of the concept of the autistic spectrum. And this brings me back to answering your question. What is this genre? And it is something that we had to bring into existence, and all of us around this table. We operating in a genre of performance and genre representation that doesn't actually exist, so we've had to bring it into existence with our work, with my friend's poetry and my friend from New York and his True Life Confession show.
We'll meet the other three stealth Aspies round the table, and if you introduce yourself and just explain what your special skill is.
Anders Lee here. I'm the one from New York City.
The one from New York. There's only one stealth Aspie in the whole of New York City.
So I'm actually not part of the stealth Aspies company, but Paul Wadey here so generously invited me along because my show has similar subject matter. I'm a big fan of stealth Aspies. I think they're doing really important work along the lines of representation and representing people who are often sort of ignored. My show is a little different. My aim is to deconstruct and to sort of confront the question, what do we mean by autism? Because the reality is we don't have a consistent definition. And I've noticed a big difference among people who I talk to who are diagnosed at a later age, who it's often a very cathartic experience. But in my case, I was diagnosed, I was 5 or 6 years old. This is during sort of the diagnostic craze of the 1990s. And for me, it helped me in some ways getting that diagnosis. But in many ways, it was not helpful. And I really think that the mission of my show is to sort of begin to question labels and sort of see how, if we can move beyond them. That's not going to happen overnight. But I think we really need to start unpacking what we mean by autism, neurodiversity. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to bring to the table.
Okay, cool. I'm all about questioning labels.
Can I explain that? Anders and I met about a year ago. When
2 years ago.
2 years
Yeah.
ago, you were doing a stand-up comedy act, and
Yeah.
we bumped into each other in Edinburgh in the Three Sisters. Quite by chance, overheard a conversation.
Uh-huh.
And you came to see me in my solo show, and you came to see Stealth Aspies.
Yeah.
2 years later, you came back with what I consider to be an advancement, or a kind of a step up from the work that I and we were trying to do. And Anders, I think, is what I've always wanted to achieve, because all I try and do is make sense of everything and try to support other neurodivergent artists. And it's kind of like Anders took the work that he found and advanced on that with a very personal piece of work, which I think is brilliant.
Okay. So, now what we're going to try and do, Paul, I'm just going to talk this through now. I'm going to try and talk to these two people without you interrupting.
Good luck. It's not going to work.
It's just a thought, it's a concept. It's an idea that I'm throwing open to the table. But, I know that what the lay person hears is that, people with Asperger's syndrome have these kind of superpowers, and yours is obviously interrupting. Some people it's maths. Some people can redraw entire scale drawings of the whole of Edinburgh City Centre. You just interrupt people. Moving on. Sir, on my left.
Okay, my name is Alan English. English with a Scottish accent.
Good. That's a dodgy name to have around here.
Even dodgier when you grew up in the northeast of Scotland. I grew up in Aberdeen.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Well known for its complete lack of sense of humour.
Quite so. No. I mean, my kind of the potted history of myself is I was diagnosed at the age of 16. I didn't find out about it until I was 19. I've lived down in London now for the past 14 years, and in that time I've become an actor, autism trainer, and performance poet. And I just want to explain. I think I better explain here now actually how Stealth Aspies came about in my own way. Now it would say. Well, it began with Paul doing his own show, Guerrilla Aspies, and then shortly I'd been doing this for a couple of years, and he approached me, here in Edinburgh one year, and he says to me, well, I'm thinking of putting together my own autistic theatre company, and you're just basically doing doing stuff about autism and just trying to spread awareness and and understanding. And by this time I was already an autism trainer. I've been teaching support workers and also moved on to teaching employers about Asperger's syndrome. A lot of the poetry I write and which I perform in the show is reflective of my condition. Now the show itself is built out of a survey that Paul put out to autistic people on his website, and what we did was build monologues off the back of the survey responses. So they come across in the show almost like personal stories, and we've spliced in these monologues with original poetry performed by myself and various others, including Sarah, whom you're about to meet here. That's kind of the substance of the show, and what I've been kind of stunned by is coming here. I mean, I've done several shows in Edinburgh, but no other show has gotten the response for me that this show has got. I mean, it connects with people because it's communicating a side of life that isn't very much talked about. And what I've found, especially with the monologues, I think we're kind of a conduit for these people who can be very articulate when they're writing down their experiences on the page or through the survey, but who might be a little bit more reticent to talk to people face to face. So I've seen this show as kind of a conduit for those experiences and putting them out there not just to other autistic people but to the world at large. Now, okay, we're going to be talking about here. We've been talking about here about neurodiverse. Okay, now with the neurodiverse, I mean, for me, it encompasses people on the autistic spectrum. But I'd like to point out that behaviours who engage in behaviours or states of being that are different, but not necessarily harmful. For example, our definition of neurodiversity does not encompass, say, for example, psychopaths or paedophiles. Now, I bring this up. Now, you're looking at me quite horrified here because I bring this up because this has been critiqued online, and people have been saying what is neurodiversity and what is not. What is not neurodiversity, and we're trying to promote a kind of a positive, inclusive aspect of neurodiversity that involves people being different, that involves giving people the right to be different without being harmful.
Well, that came out of the blue. I never imagined that neurodiversity would have been thought by anyone to include psychopaths and paedophiles. I can imagine maybe a diverse person who is also a paedophile, but that's not part of the neurodiverse condition.
Well,
and psychopathy is a completely separate position.
Yeah.
Condition, rather.
Go on.
Well, I was just going to add, psychopathy, I talk about this in my show, the Asperger. We call it Asperger in the US, although we don't use it as a term anymore. It sounds a lot better over here, Asperger. But his diagnosis was not named after himself. Asperger's syndrome didn't come around until after his death.
Don't get me started.
Yeah, the diagnosis he used was autistic psychopathy. And what he was talking about back then doesn't necessarily have any relevance to what we're discussing now in people who are self-identified Aspies in 2019.
Wow. Okay. So you've done this all wrong in these kind of feminist, female positive times. We've left you till the end. I'm very sorry about
It's
that.
okay, it gets worse. I don't identify as a woman.
That's cool.
My name is Serin Thomasin. I'm an autistic genderqueer poet who's joined Stealth Aspies for the first time this Fringe. So I do the poetry along with Alan in between the monologues. I think it's fair to say that even though the company is called Stealth Aspies, we're not if we were Stealth Aspies, we'd be the worst Stealth Aspies in the world. We are representing the Stealth Aspies who we hear in the show through the monologues,
Which are kind of like verbatim theatre.
Yeah.
Really. Which is wonderful. It's a great way to give people a voice, I think. And are you all the performers, or are there other performers as well?
In the past, we've had different people come and go in the past, so I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm not the best person to answer that question because I've only just
You've only
come
just
in,
joined.
so
Okay. It's I'll just put this briefly before. We've had different people come and go in the past, but we've had some people stay for one show, maybe two shows. But the core company who've been here at the start has just been myself and Paul, and we were lucky to have Sarah join us this year. So.
Okay, so I want to know more about you.
Okay, so where do we want to start? I was just thinking when everyone was talking. Of course, an autistic theatre company would do monologues. What else would we do? And that's why I've been drawn to performance poetry. There's a joke that you hear on the poetry scene is that performance poets are actors who couldn't bear to share a stage. But I think there are a lot of autistic poets out there. I know especially performance poets, and I think being told that you can talk for exactly 3 minutes and someone's going to tell you when to stop, and then you can go off and you're allowed to learn it in advance. That's like autistic heaven. So yeah, I think there's a lot of, and I've also noticed, and this is true of Alan as well. A lot of autistic poets use rhyme and meter and rhythm a lot more than there's a lot less free verse in the autistic poetry scene because we like our patterns and we like our I don't like maths, but I like maths when it's in poetry and I could make it all fit together. So that's my special interest.
And the queer identity, is that a completely separate thing, or is it?
That's a really interesting question.
Oh, thank you very much.
So I I was diagnosed as autistic at 36, and it wasn't long after that that I started to identify as non-binary. And I think part of that was I'd always felt like I was doing being a person wrong, and I didn't know why. And then once I got educated about how autism really worked and not how autism worked in the film Rain Man, because I was like, that's not me. And then I learned a bit more, and I was like, okay, so that's that and that's that. That makes sense, but the gender thing still doesn't make sense. And it helped me to kind of go, oh, this is an entirely different thing, and then understand that I didn't identify as a woman. I do think it actually comes up in the show. There's a wonderful monologue from a person called Stevie, who every fact in Stevie's monologue also applies to me, so it was quite weird hearing it, down to ages and things. But Stevie says in the monologue that they think that there's possibly a correlation between queerness and autism, because there seem to be, and I've noticed this, a lot of, especially assigned female at birth, queer people who are also autistic. I don't think that there are more queer autistic people. I think that autistic people are very, very bad at being in closets. And so if you're autistic and you happen to be queer, you're telling people as soon as you figured it out, because not doing it makes me itchy. I don't like the idea of, like, I just randomly go, hello, I'll have a coffee please, and by the way, I'm queer, because and autistic, did you know that? Because it doesn't feel comfortable to be keeping a secret like that. So I think there's loads more queer people who don't say anything because A, they're not autistic, so they don't have that I need to tell you, I need to tell you, I need to tell you, and B, they have got more to lose socially. So like, what? I'm going to come out as trans and everyone's going to look at me weird. Oh, that's a really strange idea that's never happened to me before. So there was nothing to lose by saying, oh yeah, I'm non-binary too.
I think that's fascinating. I mean, I kind of think that pretty much everything's a spectrum.
Yeah.
And it's the easiest thing is to go, well, there's male, there's female, there's gay, there's straight, there's neuronormative, and
there's disabled, there's non-disabled.
Yeah,
It's
everything is a spectrum, and we're just getting better, A, at seeing that, and B, at acknowledging that.
Yeah.
But to be diagnosed at 36, what did you think you were before that?
Weird.
Yeah, weird. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I was bullied a lot at school, so I was like, oh well. I used to say this actually when I was about 10. I came out with this, and when I look back, I'm like, oh. People used to say, oh, you get bullied a lot. It's because you have low self-esteem. And I remember saying, I don't have low self-esteem. I think I'm great. Everybody else has low esteem of me because no one got me. I could have a lovely time playing on my own, but as soon as I was playing in a group, it didn't work. So I was like, no, it's not me. I don't think I'm bad, except when people are telling me I'm bad. So then I do, but it's not coming from me. It's coming from outside. And when I had that light bulb moment, which came because somebody told me that autistic people, I've been told all my life that autistic people don't have empathy, and I am sometimes like completely overcome by empathy and find it really difficult to interact with people because I'm empathizing with them all too much. And when I heard about the concept of hyper-empathy, which can be a very like strong autistic trait, I was like, oh, because everything else on the autistic sort of checklist makes sense, but I've just been saying, no, I have empathy, so I can't be. And no, hyper-empathy is a thing, and that just turned the light bulb on for me.
Do you, plural, think it's better for people to get diagnosed earlier, or does that put you in a box?
For me, I think it's better if you get diagnosed earlier. In fact, the way I've seen it, I think there are too many adults who get diagnosed late and who consequently have not gotten the support they may have needed to make a better life for themselves. I think the earlier you learn, I think the easier it is to adjust long term. And I think I tell people, who are kind of working or supporting with people with Asperger's, never go on the assumption that someone has autism. Make sure you get a diagnosis first, because then you know what you're dealing with. and you can adjust, your support and work situation accordingly.
Yeah, because just occasionally, okay, maybe not that occasionally, but there are elements of the irritating, stroppy 14-year-old boy that have a large crossover with people on the spectrum. No eye contact. And I think one of the for me, we're desperate to diagnose everybody as something now. Nobody is just irritating or shy, or they've always got some kind of syndrome.
I mean, you can be both.
Good point. I mean, but are you allowed to say that to somebody
I
on the
think
spectrum?
so.
Oh, fuck's sake, sort yourself out. Why are you being so moody? Is that some kind of disabled abuse?
I don't think so, because if you're there's a joke that a friend of mine who's also autistic and I have, is that there are a lot of people, and don't wish to profile, but they are very often cis white straight men who will behave absolutely abominably and then say, well, I'm autistic, I've got and we started referring to it as assholer syndrome. And it's like, yes, I work with young people who have been excluded from school, and quite a lot of them are on the spectrum, and a lot of ADHD and autism is quite well represented. And I was working with this one kid, and he kept saying, well, he'd do something like throw a chair at someone or something. I'd say, you can't do that. And he'd say, but I'm autistic. And I'd say, yes, so am I. I haven't thrown any chairs today. It's both true that it's more difficult for you than it is for other people to keep your temper in this situation, but it's also true that it's on you to learn strategies to not hurt people.
Can I ask, can I ask...
This is Stephen, who's
Sorry.
twiddling our knobs.
Yes, as we speak. Can I ask if it's important to anyone who's autistic to make sense of the world and make sense of themselves and be aware, then it must be extra frustrating to not be aware of something that could be diagnosed, and you don't know what it is, and when it's diagnosed there's a relief there. But
Yes.
you're trying to make sense of the world, and there's something about yourself that you can't make sense of.
But what is it that what is it? And this is I have a bit of a different perspective, but it's not as if you pop open someone's brain and say, oh, there's the autism.
Yeah.
It's a behavioral diagnosis. It is a subjective diagnosis.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Completely subjective.
Well, yeah. I mean, there are objective things that people do.
Significators.
Yes.
Yeah.
And but there's not one thing that makes some people autistic and others not. And the reason, and I want to be clear here, because I'm not saying that it's just people have issues and they need help with their issues. But to me, a way that can kind of make that more difficult is these labels, are these categories. Autism itself, that goes back to Eugen Bleuler, who was a psychiatrist, who was a eugenicist. He was the first person to use autism. It comes from the Greek word autos, which means self. So already the umbrella of autism, if we're speaking literally, as I guess I'm prone to do, that means it's someone who is into themselves, is just obsessed with themselves, which clearly is not the case for a number of people, a wide number of people who are diagnosed with autism. What
happens when non-autistic people name autistic people?
Right. Yeah. But I.
So if an autistic person, sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
If an autistic person had named autistic people, what would they have called them?
Ooh,
What
that's
would
going to be a
depended
poem
on
later. I don't know.
I mean, I really think it's like, I mean, I don't think I have autism. I think I have Anders-Lee. Like I have my own issues from my own brain and my own experiences, and everybody has their own unique brain.
I am what I am.
Exactly.
I am my own special creation.
Yeah, and so it's different in my country where where you have the NHS. If you get an autism diagnosis, can be a very useful thing, and I don't want to undermine the importance of that, is getting resources and things. But in the United States, it was considered a pre-existing condition not so long ago. It was used as a way to kick people off health insurance.
Wow.
So I think ultimately, and again, not going to happen overnight, I dream of a world where we don't use the word autism.
Cool. I'm all for that.
I didn't know anything about autism or that I had autism until I was diagnosed in December 2004 at the age of 41. having just been acquitted of common assault in a cinema.
Whoa, tell us more.
The story is there in The Guardian Weekend magazine, October 2005. You can read the whole bizarre tale of how my best friend from the age of 10, two 41-year-old men, were sitting in a cinema. Good reason why we were there, giving him a break from moving house, and he was on the first of his 4 children, and these 4 nasty little kids made out. We attacked them. By the time we'd both been acquitted, this bizarre event, my sister-in-law insisted I had this condition. I did laugh at her, but she got the diagnosis for me. The courts paid £1,200. It was all over. I walked into a social group that year and I thought, oh my God. And then I found the answer to a question that I didn't have. And thereafter, it was about 2 months later, I met a woman in the social group who had found out about it in New Scientist and was 40 when she was diagnosed and had no idea about it either. And we've been married
wow.
for over 13 and a half years.
So, on the basis of what were you given that diagnosis?
Well, I was given a 4-hour interview with my brother and my father, various questions, because it is all arbitrary and it is all cross-referential. As Anders says, this is the thing, it's very much, still, if you don't look, sound like you're autistic, how are you going to get diagnosed? Well, there's certain universal characteristics we all share, which I was found to have. My sister-in-law just knew I had it. And ultimately, my father was accidentally diagnosed at the age of 73 at the end of this 4-hour process, and that's what it's like.
Wow.
It's a cross-referencing a question.
So because it's odd to think of it just listening to what Anders says, to think of it as something that you have, as opposed to just something that you are.
Yeah, absolutely. I like, obviously anybody can use whatever language, however they want to self-describe. I would never say, unless I was quoting someone, that I have autism. I would always say that I am autistic. I think coming back to a question that you asked before, would I rather have been diagnosed as a child? No. If I was a child now, I'd rather be diagnosed now, but not in the 90s, thank you very much. If I had been diagnosed as having special needs at the school that I was at, I wouldn't have been given like the opportunities to like do A-levels. The way it was seen at the time, I'm utterly grateful that I was diagnosed as an adult.
You'd probably been weaving baskets.
It would have closed doors. It wouldn't have opened them. I think now it's still not great, but there's a lot more understanding of childhood autism and how it interacts with academic achievement or not, and how finding the stuff that someone's good at and making the most of that wasn't like that in the 90s. So I'm very happy that I was diagnosed as an adult.
How, Anders, how do you see the way forward to getting rid of the labels?
Well, and this is where I want to be very careful, because some people might take that and say, "Oh, let's just throw the baby out with the bathwater." That can't happen.
We're great at that nowadays. There are babies hurtling through the air in the wake of bathwater.
You're going to get something quoted. It's going to be on Twitter. That's going to be it.
Just go ahead, safe in the knowledge that somebody somewhere is going to get upset.
Yeah, well, I've learned from the master Paul.
Yeah, actually, it's normally Paul that gets upset, so he's here.
I think the way forward in places like the UK is reversing cuts. Reversing cuts to things like healthcare. People have sensory issues that they need to be treated, no matter what they are on paper. If you're having issues with sensory integration or social, I don't want to say dysfunction, but you're having social issues, you should get treatment. People need treatment based on their individual profiles. And we also need a different education system. We need to, my country, privatization is a big problem, but beyond that, we need to think about curriculum. We need to think about the way people are taught. We need to have classrooms that make it okay for people to self-simulate, and if someone can't control their voice and they make noises, that has to be tolerated. We have to accept that. So it really just comes down to treating people as individuals, but also in service of a collective sort of humanity, having a collective love of one another.
So reversing health cuts, giving individual kind of treatments, changing the education system, and loving one another more, you're fucked. Almost none of that is going to happen.
Yeah, that would be the ideal.
Yeah.
Well, all we can do as individuals here at the Edinburgh Festival, as performers, being visible, social media, is to be seen as out autistic adults leading lives in which we are positive about our identities, the whole underlying issues of comorbidities of mental health. Around this table is a group of individuals who are out there being positive about our identities, representing us in many different attitudes, many different ways, diverse. That was as a Buddhist, you see, this thing about unconditional loving kindness and being seen to be healthy. You can lead a functional, healthy life as an autistic person, because the mental health issues I see in so many autistic people, and the ones that I've had in the past that I've got over, are much more prevalent. It's a bigger deal than being autistic. It really is.
I'd just like to point out here, I mean, one of the misunderstandings I try to try to deal with in my training, and which I hope comes across through the work that we do, is that while autism is not a mental health disorder, unfortunately, if you are autistic, you are more likely to develop mental health problems. I make this quite explicit in the training. I mean, the two obvious common ones are anxiety and depression, and that comes, I think, a lot through isolation and not having a sense of connection or common ground with other people, and consequently you can feel disconnected, and when that happens, you're more vulnerable to kind of mental health issues. Also, as well as stimming, Anders mentioned stimming. Another thing that can happen with this is meltdowns. Autistic meltdowns, when you get to kind of sensory overloads, the world becomes too much. The world becomes too much for you. That's another thing I think that needs to be needs to be understood. Put out there in the mainstream, because right now, I mean, if the average person, if an average person walks past someone and without having any idea about them, and they see that an autistic person having a meltdown, they're not going to think, oh, he's an autistic person, he's having a meltdown. They're just going to think, nutter. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sorry, I had this happen to me because actually coming back from the Fringe a couple of years ago, I'd completely messed everything up. I needed to get from Edinburgh to Market Harborough because my best friend was getting married at the Fringe, and then the next day I was supposed to perform at Shambhala. And I'd gone, oh yeah, I'll be fine, I'll get the train down, and everything went wrong on the train. The train was full of stag doos and hen doos and football fans, and so it was this sensory nightmare, and this I'm not going to get there, I'm not going to get there. I got to Sheffield, and the last train to Market Harborough had gone, and I went to try and sort it out, and I was like, look, can I get the first train in the morning? And he was like, no, you have to go tonight. We'll go down to Derby and we'll get you a taxi. And I was like, the site's going to be closed. I'm going to be homeless for the night. I'm going to go in the morning. No, you have to do this. And I had a complete meltdown. I went from being very articulate and talking to this guy to being completely non-verbal, like jelly legs, like crying and shaking on the platform. He'd just seen me being verbal, so of course he thought I was faking, because he didn't have any idea. I told him I was autistic. I wrote on my phone, I can't speak. He tried to get me arrested. I ended up being like picked up by my friend who I managed to text, who came and got me. And yeah, I tried to complain, but they didn't really take it seriously. But
nightmare.
While this guy was an absolute arse, he didn't know, he obviously hadn't had any training about autism, and what he saw was somebody saying, yes, I need to get this train, I need to do this, I don't want you to do that, no thank you, I don't want you to get me a taxi from Derby, I'm going to get the train in the morning, yeah, I am going to complain about this, but not about you, I'm complaining about the train delays, no, please stop shouting at me, and then suddenly, like, stop doing that and stop being able to speak. That lack of education, I can totally understand why he thought I was throwing a tantrum because I hadn't got my way, is what he saw. I literally couldn't speak, but he couldn't see that because that education wasn't there. So yeah. I think education and understanding is like so important in those situations.
Wow, certainly is. I mean, I've got, not that it's the really the same. It's the same, only different. A very, very close friend of mine's a woman called Tanya Lee Davis. She's a brilliant comedian. She's a little person, and she gets everywhere on a scooter. And she says in America, absolutely great. She said the minute she comes to the UK, she's made to feel completely disabled because she was left on a tube train that was taken out of service overnight because they forgot she was still on there. You know, she phones ahead to say we need the ramp and is constantly left. She's
Wheelchairs and trains.
Oh, she's put in areas where the dustbins should go.
Yeah.
She not in the same way, but she melts down, and what they see is this crazy little woman on a scooter, puce in the face and sobbing hysterically. And it happens to her
Well, you would.
all the time.
Yeah.
And Britain just seems to be generally very bad at
Transport and
coping with
access.
anything.
A terrible combination.
So the reason I was able to initiate all this and bring together people who I think are making a better job of it than me was because I was in school in the 1970s in Liverpool.
Crikey, hardcore.
I thought I had an accent there.
Oh yeah.
Great.
But I'm one
Does
of
it make
these.
more sense now?
You talking to me, Tuna Brick.
Oh yeah, Tunebrech. I'm made that for years, girl. That's the 70s term. that.
Come on, you
Oh,
Reds.
come on, I'll have you out. I'll have yous all out. Oh, you've got to be so scarce. But I just I'm very good at healing, is my secret. I'm very good at healing from anything that happens to me. And oh dear, things have happened to me, but I can't complain. And so I was able to facilitate everyone because one of the faculties to talk about is not some God-given talent or gift or ability. It's the capacity to get up in the morning, to be positive in life and to support other people. And that's it, you see. But most of us don't have that because of the kind of experience Seren described. And we've all around this table had things that we're not even mentioning, which would horrify you. There's no doubt about it. If you're autistic, don't worry. The only autistic I ever met who liked school was my wife. And she's still there. She's working in one. It's incredible, isn't it?
In what way, can I ask, is being a performer helping? Or what role does that play in managing the whole scenario?
You see, autistic people always get this thing about what helps you with your autism. It makes me more OCD and ADHD because I love my obsessions and I really love my and I do. What did you get happier? I love going on my obsessions. The answer is that I am one of those autistics who can't help but tell the truth, and I found an orientation and an identity in my 30s, just obsessed with being a Buddhist. And so you get up and you tell the truth, but that's not as good as facilitating other people and being eclipsed. Now then you're being a Buddhist. Then you create a scenario like this where you bring other people to the table. Then you can, because there's a job needs doing. And everyone here has got a unique angle and talent through their poetry, through their performance. And it's a kaleidoscope, it's a whole spectrum of individuals who can express. And the world here and everything will be different over time. So you're terraforming, as you say in science fiction circles. You're taking a barren world, turning it into something green and beautiful.
Interesting. Anyone else just want to come in on Stephen's question?
Well, yeah, I mean, for me, it was a good way to kind of, just tell it as it is for me. Seren mentioned, about rhythms and rhymes. I mean, it's just, well, for poetry, especially communicating to audiences, that's how I discovered, I could do poetry in London. It's because there's a lot of open mic nights, poetry open mic nights down there. So plenty of opportunities for you to go on and express yourself. I mean, not just for poets. I mean, comedians, musicians. I think there's a lot of opportunities, down in that city. And I don't know whether the same for Scotland, but definitely in London there was a lot of opportunities down there. And yeah, it's a good way to kind of by sharing your experiences through poetry, you make that connection with others that you might not otherwise get. I mean, a friend of mine who's now passed away, she wasn't autistic, but she had this saying about poetry: it's not about how good you are, it's about how real you are. So your poetry might not be up to laureate standard, but if you're saying something that is true and that is unique and that is specific to you, then you will make a connection with an audience, which is what making art of any kind is all about.
Correct.
So,
you'd be very hard to argue with.
You wouldn't dare, would you?
I love an argument, but I'd be scared to argue with you.
So, Yeah, I've been like knocking around the poetry scene in Sheffield, where I'm from, for the last.
You talk very posh for a Sheffield person.
I know it's because I'm here, so it's gone neutral again. I've
Ah,
got a
right.
very chameleonic accent. When I'm in Sheffield, I talk broad Sheffield. When I'm at work, I talk broad Sheffield because I work with like local kids, and I'm not doing it on purpose. It just.
You're
It's
talking
chameleons.
posh for the podcast.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Not on purpose, it just happens. My mum was from Buckinghamshire and my dad was from like Leeds, so yeah, they're all in there. Anyway, so there's a poetry scene in Sheffield that's grown up over the last sort of 15 years that I've been around on it, and I was amazed when I found it because I was in my 20s. I was going to club nights, I was going to the pub, and I was hating it, but that's what you were supposed to do to socialise. And then I found this scene where people sat quietly and listened to one person talking at a time, for measured amounts of time, which they explained to you in advance how long it was going to take. Sometimes they'd even ring a bell to let you know, and then you could, if you felt stressed before the show or after the show, it was a poetry night, so it's full of like artistic temperament poets, so nobody would question it if you wanted to go out and not talk to anybody for a bit. So it's this kind of lovely, nurturing environment for autistic people that's not been set up as that. It just happens to be that. So
It's a community that
yeah.
you fit into.
Yeah, so even if I didn't do poetry, I would be hanging out at the poetry scene all the time anyway. But then I get to like indulge this special interest of playing with words and playing with rhyme and playing with meter and metaphor and all of that. So it's like double heaven as far as I'm concerned. I absolutely love being on the poetry scene because it's just an autistic playground.
Well, when I was a little kid, I wasn't really very good at anything except for performing. Like, I was just willing to get on stage and be an idiot. I just, I don't know if that's a talent or not, but it's something.
Oh, yeah, here in Edinburgh, that's definitely
I
a talent.
guess, yeah.
I mean, there are awards for it. No, it's definitely a talent.
Well, some of it is
That's
a
a
little
category
more.
on the Fringe.
I know.
Yeah.
Did you, or do the four of you equally have the sense that when you're on stage speaking with a whole group of people, whether it's 10 or 100 people in the room, that's easier than speaking one-on-one
Oh, yeah.
with a stranger?
Yeah.
So the performance side of things would lend itself to that?
Yeah, well, for me, I wasn't willing to talk about this stuff until, actually, when I met Paul, that was one of the first people I ever told I have this diagnosis. It was something I was extremely private about for most of my life, and I was a comedian. I know I've been sort of dark and serious so far, but I do stand up in New York, but I hadn't brought myself into it. I didn't really have a perspective, and then I just kind of went to a place where I was like, I need to figure out what makes me me and share that with people. And so, yeah, that is easier than telling people in person, just doing
So
it
you
in a way that I
do
can.
in stand-up now as well, or?
Yeah, well, my show is a good chunk of it is stand-up, and I told myself that I was going to be funny on tonight's podcast. I guess there's still some time.
Yeah, Brandon.
It is a funny show, and a lot of it is stand-up. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Has I don't know if his fame reached America, but has Robert White kind of become the patron saint of people on the spectrum in performance arts?
Yes, Robert is merely one of many. He's very good, isn't he?
He's very
We had
good.
the second biannual Autistic Arts Festival this year with Kate
That
Fox.
sounds like no fun at all.
It was brilliant. Kate Fox was on, she was brilliant. Robert White was on. Dr. Rhea Lena had played the first one. If you know about Rhea, personal friend of mine.
Realina, she's great.
She is
Brilliant,
great.
isn't she?
She's
Yeah.
so good.
We know
Oh, you'd
Rhea.
think she was normal. Right.
You know me, I don't like to use the word. Almost nobody's normal. Just mathematically, there's not that many people. It doesn't mean
It depends
most
which
people.
lens you've got on.
Good
So
point.
there's been a lot of terms used around this table we haven't remarked on, like normal, and then Anders talking about, I used to make an idiot myself, and he's got a show called Dummy. When we often find ourselves being self-depreciatory and negative on ourselves. Oh, I'm an idiot, moron, fool. There's a dark side to that. It's how you grow up. You're always made to feel right from being a child. There's something a bit wrong with you. So I get paid to do training for the National Autistic Society, and I'm always going on about this use of language. You wake up in the morning, congratulations, you've got a disease, disorder, and condition, according to some people. That's why people like ourselves trying to put up, we've got a human nature. It's a positive self. It's not doing you any good.
Yeah, but you have to have the right to reclaim these words.
That's right, yeah.
And own the words.
Yeah.
And ultimately, although it doesn't feel like it when you're underneath, they are just words.
Yeah.
You know, there are terrible things happen to people. They get attacked. They get physically bullied. I'm kind of the opinion that we need to get into perspective. You can't just be horrified about absolutely everything that happens to every single minority group.
Yeah.
And saying a word is not the same as doing something physical or doing something that will cut off a way forward for them or exclude them from something.
I think that's very relevant for me, like from a queer and the word queer. Like, I had a really interesting experience of when I worked for the NHS. I wanted to identify as genderqueer and I couldn't because that would be offensive.
What?
Because the word queer was deemed too offensive to use.
Crikey.
And I was like, but it's my word. No, but it's offensive. But then I'm offensive, so I had to be a non-binary. But like, if people are hurt by words, like I can't stop that from happening. But I think that reclaiming is the most powerful thing that you can do. Making a word your own and using it positively is the best thing to do in that situation.
The thing, of course, is that often words are reclaimed, but not by everyone at the same time.
Yes, exactly.
So there's a delay.
Yeah, so you've got, like, with the word queer, like quite often older LGBT people in England react very negatively towards it. In mainland Europe, you hear it pretty much used as an umbrella term. In America, you can go and study queer theory. And yeah, you sort of have to kind of constantly recalibrate. Where am I? Can I use this word? Is this going to be okay? I would always use it for myself, but I'd be very careful about using it about anybody else until I knew that it was okay. But I think, like I don't like the word Asperger's, as Anders was saying. It's not a diagnosis that's used anymore. But I quite like Aspie because that's the community taking it back.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I've got several friends who are on wheels or sticks or and they call what they do crip comedy.
Yeah.
But you get, if I say to someone, now my friend's doing a crip comedy night, it's whoa, suddenly I've become a word Nazi. But in Anders, the future, and I would love to have many fewer labels. I think that's the way forward. But then you can't have a Stealth Aspies group because there's no Aspie label. You would just have to be comics or poets.
That's what we want. We just want to be ordinary people.
Speak for yourself.
You are.
No.
A human being and a beautiful person and very intelligent and great company. And everything else is specifics of your identity. But what I see is this person. That's how I've always tried to find
I
who
evidently
people
completely disagree with everybody around
Right,
the table. That's
right,
cool.
right, yeah.
See, I think labels is just another word for language.
Right.
Okay.
So like if we say like what people don't say to straight people, why are you labeling yourself?
Mm-hmm.
They don't say it to neurotypical people. They say it to the people who are the minority. And I think the more labels, the better. I think that the problem is that we don't have enough labels, and we say, oh, you're autistic and you're not autistic, or you're disabled and you're not disabled. It's that binary. If you keep shattering the binary down into smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller pieces, then you just have more words, and then you have more language, and you can describe things more accurately.
Okay, yes, I see where you're going with that, and up to a point, I agree with it. It's just that the way we are doing it now is that it's becoming more and more and more kind of prescriptive, and it's becoming a minefield, because if you don't know exactly the right word for the right thing and use it, you're committing a hate crime.
Well, language is important, and it's often easier to describe something or someone by what it's not. So rather than saying, normal or typical, then being able to say, I'm not abnormal is,
That'd be a very clumsy way of
Well,
introducing.
yes,
Hello,
yes.
my name's Copstick. I'm not abnormal. Well,
Yeah.
I think just like describe
Funny though.
yourself in the way that's relevant at the time.
Yeah.
So like when I started, I said I'm an autistic genderqueer poet because I thought those were the three labels that were the most relevant to this conversation. Another time I might say I'm a Sheffielder who works in education because in another context those would be the labels that were appropriate. The others don't stop existing. Like it's just what's relevant.
yeah, and you didn't totally freak out when I misgendered you as a woman.
I mean, lots of people don't. I mean,
For which I
I mean,
apologise.
that's fine. Like, I know what I look like. I know that I have boobs. I know that people see me and they see a woman, and I have a conversation with them, and then they understand. And if they go, no, you're wrong. You're a woman. That's misgendering.
Right, yeah.
Like, if I look at something and think it's something and it turns out to be something else, I'm not committing a hate crime. If I see and I go like, actually you're not what you think you are, you're a different thing, I know better, that's where the crime comes in, that's where the hate comes in.
If I could just, I think that from a community aspect, I think that labels are very positive. They're coming from the people as they're making their own sort of decisions about how to represent themselves and identify. What I object to is sort of the institutional medical framework where you have these sort of blanket diagnoses that encompass such a wide range of people. I'm considered by the government to be autistic because of issues I had as a kid. That doesn't necessarily give me anything in common with someone who has the same diagnosis today. We arrive at similar conditions and issues for different reasons, and I think from that perspective, it's doing more harm than good to repeatedly re-emphasize these sort of catch-all categories.
Okay.
I think for me, I mean, what matters with these labels and this particular language is not so much the fact that we have them, but how we use them.
Yep.
Yeah.
They've got to be used productively. I mean, it's when you're casting labels, you're casting labels to and fro, back and forth arbitrarily without any real sense, without any real meaning. And when you're kind of and when you're kind of making something overcomplicated for the sake of making it complicated, I think that's when it becomes a problem. I think labels can be useful so long as they are used productively, in the sense that they can be a key that helps unlock the door for someone with certain sort of support needs, and giving them access to services or to people, institutions, or whatever that can help them with their particular needs. Labels do serve a function. We've just got to be careful in how we use them.
Yeah, because let us not forget, as we come towards the end of this podcast, 8 minutes, ladies and gentlemen, you look positive, you're relieved that we're coming to the end. Has this been a terrible stream?
No, I'm just usually in bed by this time.
Oh, right, okay. But we are here because Paul got nippy on Facebook at saying, that he feels that neurodiverse arts and art groups and performers need to be recognised as a group, as a labelled group for and of themselves.
Yep, I went to Fringe Central and I spoke to them in the office and I sent them an email saying please make it a subcategory, that people may find this and find their identity as respected. You go and see shows and see their identity as represented as not being less than some concept of normal, which is never entirely defined anyway, let's face it.
So an actual, sorry to interrupt, but an actual section in the brochure that's
Yeah, you have a
neurodiverse.
subheading in neurodiversity.
Oh my God, the depressives will want their bit.
Yeah,
and
this
then,
is the thing. I
and then
would say
the
have like
menopausal women will want their bit. They have very specific needs.
But also,
Premenstrual women.
Would it achieve a
that's just one week of the
outcome?
month.
So you've got to ask yourself, would such further headings, achieve a positive outcome
No.
and have a good effect? You see, 'cause
No.
neurodiversity, that's what I was up to. I was trying to. It's
You think
all
that would have a
relative.
positive effect?
Well, it would just have a certain. That's what I'm trying to do. That's the whole idea.
So we've got
facilitate people out.
We've got children's, comedy,
Yeah.
theatre,
Yeah,
neurodiverse.
yeah,
What about disabled?
yeah.
What about
we've got
disabled?
to say.
Not
I
as a
think-
section in the programme. No.
You see, this is interesting.
And then there would be, physically disabled is not the same as it. Oh, I think we're on the highway to hell there,
See,
Paul.
You gotta
for
be-
me, it's all about being positive.
Yeah.
I keep going around in circles, but that's all I've really got
Paul.
to say. The idea of a positive championing of the term is a good representation.
But a positive a positive championing of the situation surely is not the same as building your own little ghetto.
I mean, my problem would be where would you put me? Like,
Yeah.
would I be in the queer bit? Would I be in the autistic bit? Would I be in the northern people
Exactly,
bit?
yeah.
It's a big Venn diagram,
Sheffield,
right
that's
there.
practically Midlands.
Okay, me, I'm kind of for the status quo. I think the kind of the fringe categories as they are in the I think it's I think at least for our purposes as they stand, they are adequate. I mean, our show as it stands is in the spoken word section, poetry, which is exactly where it should be. You can put neurodivergent in there in the show description, which is ideal, which is perfect, and you maybe could have more neurodivergent shows across all artistic genres: theatre, musical,
And
comedy,
linking those up.
cabaret. Now, you know, okay, maybe linking up in some kind of network, but within the fringe catalogue, it's got to be divided in terms of specific art forms, and I think that's how it's working at the minute. And it works
Absolutely.
fine.
I mean, there are even within in the comedy section, you know, you've got it'll be comedy, and then it'll be Fred blogs, absurdist, clowning, something.
right.
You can. I don't see why it can't be.
I mean,
flat, but it's. Well,
There's
I
a
still
wonderful
think
performer
it's-
on the Fringe called Harry Josephine who has gone onto Twitter and found all of the shows that have trans performers in them and made a flyer that's got all, so you can find all the trans performers. So
And there used to be an organisation called Death on the Fringe, which was all the shows about death.
all that shows.
Um,
You could
and
do one about vaginas because the podcast last week was.
there's a lot about vaginas in our podcast last week, but there's, I think, oh gosh, no, I'm.
Vaginas and then
Autistic
autistics.
people would like to see shows about themselves and their community. It's community building to have the term neurodiversity. Again, a positive. Simple as that.
Yeah, I'm still thinking it's more. Then we're going backwards to this is black comedy, and this is. But we are going to agree to differ because we frankly don't have any more time to argue.
You'd never get there. You'd never get there.
So I really, I have to be brutally honest. I really enjoyed this a hell of a lot more than I thought I was going to.
No, you just want
I thought it might have been a bit dire, quite frankly, but it's been brilliant. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you very much.
You've got shows to plug.
Yes. I am doing a show called Equality and Perversity. It is a spoken word show about my 10 years working as a sexual health and equality and diversity worker within the NHS, and the way the cuts have affected that. That's at Barbados on Cowgate. Please don't make the joke about how Barbados sounds like it's a really long way away. So it's Barbados, Cowgate, 4:30 in room 3, and it's a free fringe show.
Okay, I've just finished on with Stealth Aspies. So, but we, as the group, the Stealth Aspies show will continue. We're doing another show two shows actually, down in London. And I think it's the 13th to the 14th of September at the Chapel Playhouse in King's Cross.
Excellent.
And I will be doing my solo show, Guerrilla Aspies, which started it all. Same place we're doing Stealth Aspies, same time, 12 noon in Finnegan's Wake Pub, which will be going from tomorrow the 10th until the 16th.
Okay.
My show's listed under comedy, but personally I identify as dance. That's
Okay.
what I think I am, as an essence.
And also,
We'll be the
just
judge of that.
for those of you who aren't watching any of the video on this,
Oh God, I forgot about the video.
he's ginger.
I'm a ginger. Yes. So that should be another.
Yeah,
subcategory.
ginger. Absolutely.
I'm a fake ginger. I use henna.
Oh my goodness, that is tantamount to somebody using crutches when they
It's
don't
cultural
need to.
appropriation of ginger.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think we'll be all right.
Hopefully.
So
Although we are done now.
your dance show is on when?
Yes, it's on at 18:15 or you 6:15. 6:15, and it's at the Newsroom on Lee Street, and it's called Dummy. And it's a solo show. There's a lot of comedy, some storytelling. I talk about my experience being diagnosed as a little kid, growing up with developmental issues, the stigma. But I also talk about the history of the autism diagnosis, some of the things we discussed today. It deals with some serious topics, but at the end of the day, it's really a funny show.
Funny show with aspects of interpretative dance.
Cool.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you all very,
Better
very
up
much.
now. Thank you.
Superb, and we're clear.
Marvelous.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you so much.
It's very kind of
That
you,
was
thank
fun.
you. My actions, it doesn't matter, it doesn't really know what to do. Somebody had to start all this and do, you know, the
No,
squeaky
that was
wheel.
great.
The squeaky wheel.
Yeah.
Thank
No,
you.
because I
Yeah.
first met Paul when he came to some. Remember the Sick of the Fringe?
Oh, aye, yeah.
God, and it was like it was all these great discussions, a lot about physical disability, about all kinds of things on the fringe. It was always Paul in the corner being bad-tempered and complaining about everything.
Paul
I have
will
to
be
say,
proud of me.
and I know